Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, 2026 Construction and A&E State of the Industry, Trends Shaping Growth, Risk, and Opportunity. So without further ado, let's meet your speakers. From Grassi, we have with us Carl Oliveri, Partner and Construction Practice Leader, Robert Brewer, Partner and Architecture and Engineering Practice Leader, and from our associations, John Evers, President and CEO of the American Council of Engineering Companies of New York, Felice Farber, Executive Director of the Subcontractors Trade Association, and Mark Hertz, Executive Director of the Long Island Contractors Association. I'm now going to pass the mic over to Carl to kick us off. Carl, please take it away.
Thanks, Lauren. Appreciate that. And thank you, everyone, for being here and joining us today. I'm Carl Oliveri, the Construction Practice Leader and a partner here at Grassi. We're excited to host the State of the Industry session following the release of our 2026 Construction and Architecture and Engineering Survey report earlier this week. This conversation really is an opportunity for us to go beyond the data to discuss not only the trends shaping growth, risk, and opportunity identified by your peers in our report, but also how these trends play out in real time through the perspective of our panel of association leaders who have their feet on the ground across the industry. As we move into the second half of the year, we're hearing from you that there is a shift in mindset. The conversation is becoming less about pure growth and more about how to grow, but strategically and sustainably in a more complex building environment. At the same time, if you step back and look at what's happening across the New York metro area, there's a tremendous amount of activity that continues to shape long-term opportunity for both industries. We're seeing major infrastructure initiatives like the Gateway Development Project, Second Avenue Subway, the Bus Depot, the Port Authority, and the continued redevelopment of Penn Station. The borough-based jails initiatives continues to press on. We're seeing large-scale developments, including entertainment and casino-related projects, as well as a soccer stadium development, are all currently underway. And not to mention, we continue to find new ways to provide housing and other residential solutions to accommodate changing demographics across our state. While projects under each of these canopies are at different stages of the building process, their impact on New York construction is undeniable and is redefining. The opportunities are no longer just about volume. It's also about project selection, project delivery, risk alignment, and of course, execution in a disciplined fashion. So with the broader market context in mind, I'm going to turn it over to our Architecture and Engineering Practice Leader, Rob Brewer, to walk us through what we're seeing in the data and how it reinforces the shift across the industry.
Thank you, Carl. As mentioned, I'm Rob Brewer, Partner and Architecture Engineering Practice Leader at Grassi. As Carl outlined, while there's a significant amount of activity and opportunity across the market, the data tells us that firms are approaching this environment with a more measured and disciplined mindset. 2026 Construction A&E Survey gives us a clearer picture of how leaders are navigating that balance between opportunity and risk, and where they're focusing their attention as they plan ahead. Of the 200 respondents, which were made up 43% general contractors, 29% architects and engineers, 26% subcontractor / specialty contractor, and 2% other, here are a few takeaways we're seeing. Firms remain cautiously optimistic. About half expect revenue growth, but very few are anticipating significant gains. A&E firms being the most optimistic. And as we say, that usually bodes well for contractors in the following years. Backlog is stabilizing, not accelerating. More firms focusing on protecting margins and managing risk, not just driving top-line revenue. There is an increased emphasis on project selection and quality of work, not just volume. And firms are placing greater focus on operational discipline and financial visibility as a foundation for decision-making. At the same time, the pressure points are clear. Cost escalation continues to impact nearly every segment. Labor availability and cost remains persistent challenges, and many firms are still operating without complete visibility of their financial and operational data. So what we're really seeing is a shift in the industry towards execution quality over expansion. We believe these themes we're seeing in the data are closely aligned with what's happening across the market today, and they provide a strong foundation for the discussion we're about to have. Carl?
Thanks, Rob. We're fortunate to have a dynamic panel of construction industry leaders with us today. These folks are closely connected to the firms across the region, and they bring a range of perspectives across the construction and A&E landscape. We're going to jump into the discussion shortly, but I just want to give each of them, our panelists, an opportunity to introduce yourselves and your organizations. Johnny, if you wouldn't mind, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Carl. It's Johnny Evers. I'm the president and CEO of ACEC New York. It's a 300-member firm trade association. We've been around 105 years, and we represent engineers and in all forms and fashions, geotech, acoustical, you name it, they're in our members. So we serve as the start of a lot of these projects from the concept to the design. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Johnny. Felice? Oh, Felice, we lost your audio. There you are.
Okay. Sorry about that. So I'm Felice Farber, Executive Director of the Subcontractors Trade Association. We represent more than 350 union specialty trade contractors, perform work throughout New York City and the metropolitan area on virtually every construction trade, and they work on everything from major infrastructure and transportation projects to commercial buildings, healthcare facilities, and schools. A big part of what we do is advocate on behalf of our members and to promote legislation, policies, procurement practices that create a fair and sustainable business environment for subcontractors. And beyond advocacy, we're focused on helping our members navigate an increasingly complex industry. Includes providing education, fostering industry partnerships, sharing best practices, and helping contractors address the business, workforce, and operational challenges that come with building in today's market. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mark.
Thank you, Carl. My name is Mark Herbst. I'm the Executive Director of the Long Island Contractors Association. I've been heading up this organization for almost 20 years, and we represent the region for the heavy construction industry, roads, bridges, tunnels, parks, site development, and right across the spectrum of the industry. I also serve on the MTA board and represent Suffolk County, as well as a member of the NYRIC board. I serve now as its president that deals with industry issues throughout New York State, and had the pleasure of working with Johnny and Felice forever. And I think Johnny and I both had hair when we started in this business. So we've worked well together, and Carl and Rob, we also have had a long working relationship, and it's been a pleasure. So thanks for having me on this panel as well.
Yeah, shameless plug. These are three great organizations and partners of ours. To our audience, if you are not a member, if you're not participating in any of their events or their associations, I urge you to do so. They're cutting edge, and they always have something interesting happening within their events to participate in. So really, really take a look at their websites and get involved. Getting into some of the questions. One of the things that stood out in the survey was about 51% of the firms are expecting revenue growth, which is always a good thing, right? We always want to see revenue grow, especially on the top line, and hopefully that translates to the bottom line. But only a small percentage of that, 9%, are expecting significant gain. So clearly, there's some optimism out there, but it feels very measured. From your association's perspective, does this cautious confidence among your members, I'm sorry, let me rephrase, is this cautious confidence from your members, or is there something underlying concerns in the marketplace that they're preparing for? And related to that, with backlog pretty much holding steady for many firms, how are you advising members to think about balancing growth versus preservation over the next 12 months? Why don't we start with Johnny, because the C's always follow the AEs, and then we'll go Felice, Mark, kind of in intro order.
Sure. Thank you, Carl. I appreciate that. We keep saying cautiously optimistic. It sounds like we're the Federal Reserve, but there's a reason why you have to be cautious but optimistic. In a related financial vein, I always tell everybody when it comes to the engineering world, if we were a stock, I'd buy it, because there's always going to need the engineers, our association, our world. The same with Mark and Felice, because we're the Northeast. There's going to be rust, there's going to be salt, there's going to be deterioration, but also at the same time, we have an IIJA renewal coming up. The DOT, the state DOT capital plan is coming up. We've talked about some of the great projects already. When you talk about Second Avenue Subway, which would be the MTA, or a soccer stadium, or casinos, or whatever. This is New York. It's usually a healthy industry. But the caution comes from the volatility out there we see in the market now. Obviously, there's a question about the war going on, but also inflation. Will it go up? Will it go down? And as I say to my members all the time, a stroke of the pen can really wreck your industry or it can help your industry. We have a very active lobbying arm when it comes to our staff here in New York City and in Albany and in DC as well. When you have things out there that hit us like the R&D credit, we'll get into that, and decoupling. Or years ago, I was working with Rob on this, the PPP and the overhead rate calculations. So while we're very optimistic and know that there's going to be need for growth and we will be enlisted by the public and private sectors, we also got to be cautious because some of these things would never foresee decoupling in New York State, and it happened. We'd never foresee things like a PPP glitch when it came to the federal government where we had to take that out because of the overhead rates. So I think engineers are pretty sharp in calculating. So that's where the caution comes in.
Thanks, Johnny. Felice?
So I think cautious optimism is a good term, but it's also with a healthy dose of concern. There's a lot of opportunities out there, a lot of big projects we've heard about. There's, Penn Station, there's Port Authority, we're still doing work at the airports. But the challenge is that a lot of the work falls into really two categories. There's a lot of the mega work, and that's terrific. There's a lot of much smaller projects. But what we're not seeing is a lot of the less traditional middle market. And that's a big concern. That's been the backbone of many specialty trade contractors. But what we're also seeing, and maybe this is why folks are stepping back and looking a little bit more at what the margin is and what projects they should be bidding on, is because there's a lot of intense competition. And we're seeing incredibly tight margins on some of that bidding. Contractors are pursuing projects very aggressively. It's creating a lot of pricing pressure throughout the industry. And so some firms are finding that they really need to be very selective. And they're not looking just at volume or backlog, because it doesn't make sense to build up your backlog if you're at risk of taking the project at a potential loss or very slim margin if you potentially have any holdups in getting paid.
Yeah, to build on that, what's interesting about seeing all these mega projects is the compliance piece of it. And we're seeing more and more, from our standpoint, joint and tri ventures. We're seeing competitors come together to execute on these projects. I mean, we have one quad venture where we have 4 competitors working on a project together because that's the way the package came out. So I guess the new way to build is based on how these projects are being awarded. So it's very interesting. Mark, I'd love to hear your perspective on this as well.
Well, I just want to bring up something that I think is overshadowing all, and it's the political environment we now live in. The volatility we just went through a primary, and we've seen results in a different progressive attitude that's out there. And you got the conservative. We've got Donald Trump in the White House. Love him or hate him, he certainly has an impact on the economy and how people view things. And the tariffs that he's introduced, and then we see mega projects where he's threatening to hold back money. Things are going to the legal system. And as a contractor, if you're bidding or have work on the line, you're a little uncertain. But ultimately, it's New York. The work needs to be done. It's going to take place. But so I think that's a little bit of the reluctance. But we know that the uncertainty that's there, it's something that we live with. And it's our jobs that are on the line. So if a project being held up for reasons that have nothing to do with the engineering drawings that are done and the planning, the funding stream's not there, congestion pricing, is it going to go forward? Is it going to stop? That's something that we have to live with. And ultimately, I think we've got the grit in our region. The jobs will take place. But as an owner of a company, you've got to be very cautious about where we move forward.
Great insights. Rob?
Before we move forward, I just want to mention that when you get a chance to look at the survey result, because it's broken out between the contractors, the GCs, the subcontractors, and the A&E firms, because as Johnny mentioned, engineers have a different concerns or different risks and opportunities than maybe the contractors do. So when you get a chance to look at it, you'll see it broken out between those 3, which is just important. Next question. Contractors are citing inflation and cost escalation as top risks, alongside ongoing financial pressures, which is A&E firms state as their top risk. Also labor challenges, which all are concerned with. What are your members experiencing on the ground, and how are firms adapting to those pressures today? Let's start with Johnny.
Well, I think we've got the grit in our region. The jobs will take place. But as an owner of a company, you've got to be very cautious about where we move forward. And ultimately, I think we've got the grit in our region. The jobs will take place. But as an owner of a company, you've got to be very cautious about where we move forward.
Let's start with Johnny.
Thanks, Rob. I'm going to take the second part of that. The inflation one we know is a huge problem. And I think Mark mentioned NIRIC. We worked hard with the NIRIC partners to ask that the capital plan, the state DOT capital plan, be increased 2 sessions ago because of inflation. I mean, a dollar didn't go as far. You have a lot of material cost escalations. That's in what's in the pipeline. It also impacts us from the design side. But the issue that I'd like to take in the second part of that is when it comes to the workforce part of it. We have a shortage of workforce in all these sectors. But in the engineering world, this state is very rich with ABET universities. The universities that can grant, colleges, universities can grant an engineering degree. We're very fortunate. But we also have competition between each other. And this was mentioned, what Carl said with partners partnering up. We want the same person. So we're all fighting over the same person. We're also fighting because we want people that come to our state, oftentimes internationally, to stay here. And the H-1B visa is a huge issue because we would have, say, applications in for, say, 15 or so, and you might get 2 or 3. It's being caught up in the whole immigration debate, but we have people that want to stay here, technical experts, engineers, people that will help us in our projects, but is getting caught up in the workforce challenge. So we have, a unique perspective when it comes to getting talent, but also retaining talent. And that goes to our long-term outlook. Will we proceed with X project, or will we do something smaller? Again, play safe or play long.
Yeah, Johnny, what you didn't mention is that engineering school is hard. That's why Carl and I went to accounting. So,
that's hard too, Rob.
So it's not easy, right? So, but thank you for those remarks. And also, Johnny, maybe just a follow up on the ongoing financial pressures, which is A&E firms top. Really, is it cash flow? That's the main issue there, because I know many of our clients are dealing with that.
Absolutely. There is always the worry about the cash flow. And this is where interest and inflation comes in. If I've got to wait for a year on a project to get cash flow from the public owner or from the owner to say we're going to filter it down or we have change orders out there, we don't stop paying. We continue to work. And if the interest rates are, say, X amount and we're borrowing that to pay Y, but the final amount is going to be Z, you better have a pretty accountant, and the fulcrum there is getting smaller sometimes. And when the interest rates go up or down, that impacts us. So cash flow is huge. As you say, cash is king. You don't ever want to be in the position, and our firms don't want to be, to say we are project rich, but we aren't getting paid quick enough. Or we have so many projects going on, our payroll better keep track with what we're being paid. So that is a great point, and that's something that our firms always talk about.
Great. Thank you. So Mark and Felice, on workforce specifically, labor costs and skilled labor shortages continue to come up across the data. Are your members seeing meaningful progress in workforce development and labor shortages, or do these feel like longer term structural challenges?
Well, I think our issues are kind of similar to Johnny's. So certainly as craft labor, union craft labor, there's a steady supply of a workforce. There's a pipeline through apprenticeship training programs. I don't think we see the same issues that happen nationally. We do have, some trades that are at full employment. Others still have people on the bench, and that's a challenge. But there's a process through the unions and the apprenticeship programs for bringing people in. And certainly as union subcontractors, there's, we know what the labor rates are. They're negotiated. We know what those increases are going to be. The real challenge that we're finding, and I think this is similar to what Johnny talked about, is finding that professional staff, especially if you're a smaller or mid-sized firm. Attracting and retaining the estimators, the project managers, the other experienced management staff, that's where we're finding a real challenge and a real gap. And getting back to some of the questions about costs and price increases, the interest rates on line of credit and slow payment processes are what's really a problem for our members. Change orders that take years to resolve and get paid, slow payments from public owners is putting a lot of financial pressure on subcontractors. And it's causing, contractors and subs as well to basically be the bank for public owners. And that's a real problem. And it's putting a lot of financial pressure on companies, especially with high interest rates on those lines of credit. And it's eating away, any profit margin on these projects.
I hear the
Thank
same
you,
thing.
Felice.
Felice is right on target about the professional staffing problems that we're having with the market, but also with the organized labor. One issue that keeps coming up is the diversity in the marketplace, and trying to address that is very difficult because we're in an industry that's controlled and positively with the organized labor. However, through the apprentice program and the seniority lists and the collective bargaining agreements, to address some of the diversity issues that we're challenged with is very difficult. And this is an issue that came up with the MTA Capital Planning Committee this week, where they're trying to push ideas such as local hiring. And we've got to deal with the union organized labor agreements. And when seniority is in place, someone to go in to the industry who's from a minority community is more concerned about putting food on the table of paying their rent rather than looking at an apprentice program for 3-4 years, and they don't stick in the industry. So that's a problem of maintaining long term. And I think as far as workforce development, we're going to have to look at ways to keep that organized labor workforce trained quicker, and so we can address those issues. But that's a long-term issue.
Thank you, Mark.
My 2 cents in here, and really, Mark, Felice, kind of a follow-up to you. The cuff. It's easy for Rob and I to sit here and advise clients and other contractors just to go find smart people from other industries and layer in the construction and teach them how the construction industry works. But in reality, is that a viable solution?
When you're a small to mid-sized company, you really don't have that flexibility to put in the time and effort to train people, especially when you're looking for estimators. You need someone who could come in and really run with the ball immediately to start training. We're not the huge companies that have the big resource that you can train and bring someone up to speed. And when it's, someone that's in a role that has a direct financial impact on your company, you need that person that you can trust and get up to speed right away. So if you're bigger, there's a little bit more flexibility, but on the smaller companies, it's a challenge.
And at a smaller level, they have to be a master of all trades. So you have to hire someone who's more skilled, which is going to cost more. And to find that experience is very difficult.
Absolutely.
So that's why I love panel conversations, right? We can kind of take a quick right and go back onto the straightaway and have meaningful dialogue. So one of the things the survey highlighted was there's a divergence in risk. Contractors are more focused on obviously labor, as we just discussed, and material costs, while the A&E were more concerned with political uncertainty and demand shifts. Would love to hear about some of the unique risks your members are facing, and maybe some best practices that you've helped them implement to mitigate some of these risks. Mark, why don't we start with you, go to Felice, and then Johnny close us out.
I think most of the risks that we have, of course, is that we've talked about the employee situation, but the margins are smaller than they've been in the past. And I think a lot of the contractors today are focusing on the geography. They're going to go to the areas that they know best and the owners. And I think what you've seen in stable markets, you're going to stick with what you know. And for the jobs that are out there, as the margins go smaller, they're not taking the opportunity to try a different line or a field, a project that they're not as familiar to working with. So they're not going to put that price out there. So they're going to kind of recline and stay in their comfort level. So when things are tough, I think that's what we're seeing right now. I don't know if you would agree with that, Felice.
Absolutely. I think, what we're seeing a lot of contract risk shifting, and that's a lot of concern because a lot of that risk is shifting down to the person on the bottom of the totem pole, which tends to be the trade contractor. And so they're really starting to pick and choose who their clients are. They're looking at, have they had a good experience with a contractor or CM in the past? Who's the design team? Has that project gone well? Who's the owner? Is the owner paying timely, treating change orders fairly? So they're being a lot more selective in the choice of who they're working for. They'd rather have a little bit less work, but know that work that they do have is quality work rather than just chasing everything and risk losing their shirts.
Well, that's interesting, right? It's almost like an upward general contractor pre-qualification, picking who they want to work with rather than hoping to get picked to work with somebody. And Felice, one of the great things, just going to highlight the STA for a second. I think one of the great programs you've brought to the industry through the STA is Meet the General Contractors program, which I believe you do once or twice a year. And I think it's a great platform for that that upstream qualification to happen and to build relationships. So just wanted to thank you for that. Johnny, would love to hear your perspective on some of the unique risks the A&E folks have seen.
Yeah, the survey was, I can tell you this, the engineers were telling you what they're telling me. So the survey was spot on when it comes to the concerns, and particularly the political uncertainty. And a lot of that goes into the tax and fiscal aspects of it. And some of that goes to what Felice said is the risk. Now, I spent a couple of years at the Department of Tax and Finance, and I was also a public owner. I ran the capital plan for Albany County. Well, that was 20 years ago. Things have changed. And now we're talking about how do you mitigate some of the risks? Is it alternate delivery? Is it exploring lump sum? Is it trying to get our tax committee, which, we have a very healthy CFO committee. Grassi's very active with it. Robert is our co-chair, is to try to find ways to then use ACEC and our colleagues out there like the Business Council or Long Island contractors and NIRIC, whatever, to say to the legislature, both in Albany and in DC and New York City, you've got to look at things that are making it uncertain for us, the political uncertainty. It's things like consistent funding. It's the litigiousness of the state. And we have with lawsuits. Do we want to go with design build, progressive design build? Are we doing more partnering? So all of these are the results of the uncertainty, some of it political, that the engineers are taking very seriously. And again, if you're hit at a stroke of the pen, we're right now having to wait to expense the R&D credit in New York State. No one ever would have thought that. So the engineers, from their perspective, are almost like we're cautiously optimistic again, but there's so many things that are resulting in new ways of thinking, and we'll talk about AI later, but new ways of thinking to mitigate that risk. And a lot of that risk is, as Mark led off with, political volatility, particularly at this time of year, midterm elections. So I think the political uncertainty there that my member talked about was because in the back of their mind are many of the issues I just mentioned.
But what I find amazing is the resiliency and the ability to change across this industry. I know we always look at it and go, oh, contractors, they don't like to change. But in this past 30-minute conversation, we've already touched upon progressive design builds, joint ventures among competitors. We're going to talk about AI. So the ability of this industry to adapt to the changing landscape, it really is commendable and amazing. Bob, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about supply chain disruption. Nearly all the firms report some impact there, with the contractors potentially shifting towards pre-purchasing and stockpiling materials. This shows that the contractors are trying to manage their projects and it's evolving. What improvements can the industry embrace in terms of project delivery models to yield the best results for these type of issues? Felice?
I think a lot of it comes down to partnerships. One of the challenge for the trade contractors is you don't have as much control over the schedule and the timing. So stockpiling materials can be a little bit of a challenge, and it becomes a financial risk as well. Certainly a lot of the bigger companies are doing that, and they're managing their cost risk based on that. But I think, in terms of how are you managing the risk? How are you handling those project delivery methods? A lot of it comes down to relationships, and how are you building those relationships with the owners, with the general contractors, the construction managers, even the upstream subcontractors that you're working for. So you're looking at what's the overall project look like? What's the design experience that you've had with that, whether it's progressive design build, delegated design build. I think subcontractors are really looking to see what's the quality design, and how do they make sure that they can just, go in and bid it quickly, and make sure that they have a partnering relationship with the folks that they're working for. We are seeing a lot of increase in design assist and delegated design. And I think a lot of that then starts to flow into BIM, which we haven't haven't talked about, but how do you use that to make sure that the project goes well, that everybody is coordinated? We've seen cases where using the, building information modeling has gone really well when there's an owner or a GC that takes ownership of it. But when it's more of a check the box and isn't coordinated, and that's when you start to have more of a challenge in project delivery.
I think
Great.
it's got a
Thank
lot
you.
to do with the type of project delivery that you have and the size of the contract and the project that is going forward. If it's the design build and they're putting it together right now, as far as the supply chain goes, if you don't anticipate the work until 2028, that's going to affect your decision making at this point about what you're going to purchase, and also the material involved in the project. AC, it's you buy it as it's available. You can't stockpile that in a lot of sense. So those two factors really have a lot to say about it. And the smaller companies don't have the ability for the cash flow to purchase, and that's puts them at a disadvantage, where a larger contractor has that ability to put the product on the line and have that sitting waiting for them through the pre-purchase.
And Mark, is this all, and Felice, is this all on the backs of the contractor? Because obviously, if they were to purchase it early, are deposits for those material purchases out of the norm, or is there stored material costs where they can actually get reimbursed? I mean, what's your thoughts there? Anything changing in that?
I haven't seen much change in the municipal contracts for that, where they're open to giving you extra money. I don't know if you see that in New York City at all, Felice, but I haven't seen it in our region.
Yeah, I mean, there are provisions for stored materials, but it's got to be on the job site, and it's not in the way we would like to see it, in really protecting the contractors trying to manage the cost of those products. So it's not really done in a way that is helpful. And so it becomes a cash flow issue for those contractors who are pre-purchasing materials. And then hoping that the agency doesn't delete that scope of work, change their requirements, and then you get stuck having purchased something that is not needed.
Yeah, again, eating into the margins for the contractors, for sure. Okay, so Carla, you want to move forward a little bit? We're running a little long, possibly, but if you could talk a little bit about the operational data and financial data.
Sure. So cash flows come up a couple of times between all three panelists. Listen, this is a cash is king. Industry contractors don't go out of business because of lack of work. It's lack of cash flow. I think we all know that. And if you ever spoken to me or heard me speak, I'm passionate when it comes to cash flow forecasting on a project by project level and having that roll up into a global level. It's a lot easier to proactively identify the ebbs and flows of cash flow than to be experiencing them and trying to figure out how to navigate them. And that really starts with the data coming from the field to the headquarters. And of the survey respondents, only 25% of the firms reported strong satisfaction with their financial and operational data, which I thought was a staggeringly low number, considering how sophisticated so many of these systems we see the industry adopting and taking on. So we'd like to ask our panelists is, what are some of the best practices you've seen members implement to align the data that they're getting from the field to the decision-making process they have at headquarters? Johnny, we haven't heard from you in a few seconds. Love to hear how you see it happening in the A&E world.
Yeah, the forecasting is big, and this is something that, my members really talked about a lot of the survey was, company-wide budgeting, the rolling forecasts, and, forecasting based on, the backing with work in progress schedules. It really is a blended, but what you made a point that was very salient to this, and it is cash is king, and you never want to get stuck, but you still want to expand. So it's almost a schizophrenic idea, but our members are worried about, again, if you're going to have changes. Now, what does New York State do next year when it comes to the R&D? Do they go back to immediate expensing and match the federal government? What if the IIJA renewal is flat in New York State? There's a lot of people out there would say we have massive needs and there might be a flatness. You can't predict these things. So there's a slowness there, but at the same time, again, this is where it's counterintuitive. We know that there's going to be a need, and we know there's going to be a public demand for this. So I think what they try to do, and what my firms try to do, is to forecast as best as possible. They're a little skittish about this, and they're a little worried about the economy and the rate of inflation, because Felice mentioned something that was really key. that interest rate, you can be cautious to a degree, but if you gamble, you go out there and you're going to have a major project and you're going to go out there and the payment is slow and you put, say, 25% of your people into this project and there's a massive change. And next thing you know is you're delayed. It will cut down there so that you're only treading water. That is the worst thing for the growth in an A&E firm, because you're just living day to day then. You can't project forward because you're afraid to go out to that next big project. So I think the financial forecasting is crucial when it comes to engineering.
Mark, Felice, would love to hear your thoughts on this, considering how diverse your membership bases both are.
Well, certainly daylight into your finances is critical, because if you're bidding on a project, you need to know what your cost to complete is. And if you don't have good insight into what your costs are and how well you're performing and how you're managing the project, then you're potentially in a heap of trouble. So that's one of the biggest, one of the biggest issues. And so the challenge around that is there's so many options out there. How do you make the right decisions about what product you're using to provide that daylight? And there's a lot of ERP systems. Some are very expensive, some are less so. How do they integrate with a lot of the other platforms you're using? I mean, I think that's one of the big issues that folks are looking at is they really want to be able to buy one system that everything kind of integrates into. And one of the challenges that subcontractors face is that, the GC or the CM that they're working for might require them to use one platform that might not be something that the next person is using. So how do you handle that? How do you keep that data and have that data as a resource that you can use to get better insight into what your costs are that you can use for projections for the next project? So I think, there's a lot of challenge for folks figuring out how to create those dashboards and what the right products are and how you're investing and figuring out what the products are that are giving you the best daylight. And I even have some members that are using Claude to write their own programs to give themselves the dashboards and the clarity. So there's a lot of things that people are investigating and looking into.
Well, the cash flow is a major thing, and looking forward, especially with the technology today. A lot of my members, there's a lot of chatter about upgrading software and to look forward, and the coordination, as Felicia just mentioned. But as we move forward, I guess this is leading into the AI conversation, that as you upgrade the software, we're all using the same thing, where now each company is doing exactly the same. So you've, in a sense, become equals. What stands out one company from what they're doing from another? And the AI is pushing everybody to do the same thing. And now you're looking at what is the future and where are we going? What makes us different? And how do we stand out if we're all doing the same thing with the same technologies? And that's going to be something that we're going to need to look at. So a firm has to find out, what is my edge? What is the difference? And if we're looking forward to the cash flow, also now we've got to look forward to, as we do now, look at the companies. Who are the owners that we're working for? Who are the best paying ones? And where are we going to have the most consistency that we will continue to work with these particular players?
Thanks,
I think
Mark.
to build
I
off
appreciate that.
I was just going to say, to build off what Mark said, while you can use AI to do your estimating or to count how many widgets, but you still need to have that feel and that understanding of how something gets built. And I think that potentially is where the differentiation comes in.
Yeah, and are you guys seeing AI being used a lot in proposals, reviewing of contracts? Is that the low hanging fruit on the AI?
Proposals, definitely, in marketing. And it's something that in your survey, the engineering and design community jumped out and said that's what it's used for. And they're concentrating on that. But it's also, as pointed out, it can do a lot of things that only a generation ago it wouldn't. I mean, could you imagine, having a little tiny, mechanical drone go up and down the facade of a building 30 years ago or 40 years ago, or circling a bridge when it comes to foundations? But that's there. The next step might be, how does AI improve upon that? But you're still going to need the person with the expertise to interpret that, not to just get raw data out that might be flawed and is interpreted poorly. So I think that AI definitely is helping the engineering community when it comes to getting their message out there, to show them that they're the experts and the designers and the people to be trusted. That's a marketing aspect, a general aspect. But we're very concerned about what the misperception of AI might be, that someday it would say, well, we can replace a manager, or we can replace a land survey, or we can replace an engineer. Couldn't be further from the truth, because you're going to need that human aspect. And right now we're struggling with that, saying, well, what is that human aspect? Is it to program in and to interpret, or is it to interpret raw data? So it's a very exciting time, but at the same time, we all got to be careful about that.
Johnny, I agree with you 100%. The human aspect involved in the decision-making and seeing these projects and what's important. We talk about analytics. And if you're a sports fan, if you're struggling like me as a follower of the New York Mets, you know where analytics got you. So you need that feel in the gut and what's to do, how we do it right.
And I think to build off of that, where AI is useful is when you can use it to eliminate those repetitive tasks or streamline those repetitive tasks so you can save some time and automate some processes. But it's not, the most successful firms start by identifying a business problem. And that's really where you need to look at how you're going to use AI or any technology. What's the problem that I'm trying to solve for? Because just adapting something to adapt it doesn't help. And so where we are starting to see a lot of productive use, as well as eliminating some of those repetitive tasks, which is especially important on public projects, is the administrative burden for those projects is enormous. It probably is more than the actual engineering and building something. But what's helping a lot with is safety as well. New tools that promote safety, toolbox talks, better insight into job hazard analysis, using AI to help work through those problems and those issues. So I think there is a lot of potential, especially around things like how do you improve safety on the work site? And that's really helping folks a lot.
Great stuff.
Thank
Good
you.
conversation.
Yeah. Maybe we'll talk about top priorities. Within the survey, we asked about top priorities, and it's a little different between contractors and A&E firms. So on the contractor side, improving pricing, estimating accuracy, and margin management are the top priorities. Where in A&E firms, improved project delivery efficiency, on time and on budget performance are top priorities. And the difference there is, I guess, with A&E, obviously they're selling time. So the project efficiency, delivery efficiency, and on-time budget is very important. First, let's hear from Felice and Mark. Are you seeing contractors become more disciplined in how they bid and manage margins compared to prior years?
I don't know if I have the expertise to really talk about in prior years, but there's a lot of concern about being more strategic in what you're bidding on, what work you're doing, and really looking at how you protect those margins. As I said before, taking work for the sake of taking work is not helpful. It, just keeps you on this very vicious cycle and hoping that you have the cash flow that you can throw off to keep, moving forward. So they're looking at the very tight bidding that they're saying. They're looking at what are the projects that will give them a margin that they can sustain their business and really plan for the future. And there's concern that there's work coming out. There's big work coming out, but it's not here yet. So they're looking forward to it. But there is, getting back to the original conversation, optimism.
I see a lot of the contractors
going back in the day where contractors would bid on a job, take it at a real small margin, hoping they'd make it up in change orders, is no longer, I guess.
I find that's very frustrating to deal with change orders today. It's, again, the decision-making process in the field is not the same. It's kicking it upstairs, up to headquarters, so somebody else who's not in the field, who's enabled to make those decisions. The guy in the field, the EIS, no longer has that authority. And that's frustrating. It's time-consuming, and it holds things up. And so you're less likely to get that resolved in a quick manner.
And people they want to go in, they want to do the work, they want to get out. To the extent that you can do it timely and do it efficiently, you're going to be more profitable. When you're directed to do change order work before the work is negotiated, and then who knows how long it's going to take to get paid on that, you're just losing money potentially. And you're leaving a lot of money on the table that'll impact your cash flow. I mean, the worst is the school construction authority and the enormous volume of change orders that are outstanding that don't get resolved. It hurts contractors. And I think it's also
funding those. You're funding those change orders. Change order work.
Yeah, absolutely. And the contractor's acting as the bank for the owner.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to our earlier conversation, Felice, before we even came online. The ripple effect there is the contractor gets overextended with the change orders with an agency. They go into their bank line. God forbid something goes wrong and the bank suffers a loss. Now, all of a sudden, is that bank going to pull out of the industry and not support? We like to think not, but we never know until these things happen. So it's a proactive dialogue and it's awareness at the end of the day. And we got to get these change orders resolved. So just real quick, I just want to remind our audience, we're within 10 minutes here. So if you have any questions, we're going to leave some time for Q&A. So ask questions. We can look at them live as they're coming through. I do want to turn back into technology for 1 second, specifically on the construction end. It's always been an industry that's been slow to adopt technology. And I think with AI, we're obviously at a point right now where you have to embrace AI or you're going to get left behind. What's the saying? You're not going to lose a job because of AI, but you're going to lose a job to someone who's using AI, right? Mark and Felice, what barriers to entry, or do you see your membership base still grappling with in terms of adopting the technology? I mean, cash flow, obviously one of them, but there are any other barriers that we should be aware of?
I think the challenge is that there's so much out there. It's how do you make a decision on what's the product that you need and how to invest in it? And that becomes, how are you deciding what's the ROI on that product, which is why you really need to start with what's the problem I'm looking to solve and how can this help me solve that? One of the things that we're doing at the STA is we're getting going with a tech mentoring program, partnering more sophisticated members with less sophisticated members, just to help share information, to help members figure out how they determine what's the right tech stack to have. How do they make those decisions? How do they evaluate it? Allowing people the opportunity to compare notes on products that they're using. And every fall, we have a tech expo, trying to expose our members to the products that are out there and really help folks get educated on that.
Yeah, ACEC does that as well with the tech committees, and we've had them at our CFO sessions, and I think they do a great job helping the smaller firms within the association.
I say the smaller firms are the ones that have the most difficult time dealing with the changes with AI from the estimating, which most people, I think, are focusing on with the technology. But, they need the resources more than the larger firms that we work with.
You mentioned, and I turn it back a little bit because the design community had a little different take than this, and it was project delivery is the key. But again, it morphs into this as well because of the uncertainty. And I wanted to say amen. It's cool today to say reclaiming my time, and I wanted to say to Felice, amen on the change orders in slow payment. We've got this all over, whether it's public, private, whatever. But it goes to the project delivery. And again, just harking back to AI, you wouldn't have thought, BIM drawings years ago used to be pen and ink, and then you get software, and then you go to the next permutation. But it's a different delivery methods. We say tool in the toolbox. And I think the engineers now are saying it's not the old days of design, bid, build. And before that, it used to be bid architects and engineers. You don't even bid that anymore. It's a service. It's a professionalism. It's QBS. But to think outside the box, to use another trite cliche, I think that's why project delivery is so focused. I mean, ACEC did start an alternative delivery committee, and we even had to change the name because it was a design build committee. But then we wanted to talk about CMAR. We wanted to talk about progressive design build. We wanted to talk about issues like lump sum. And I think it was the first statement we made about partnering, and maybe Mark made it. That is part of the whole thing when it comes to projects, project delivery, is where does the industry go, the design industry go out there now to make it more streamlined so we get paid quicker, we deliver a good product, And it also takes into consideration the public's expectation of AI and the public's expectation that we use our dollars wisely. So I think that's why we want to get ahead of it.
Great. So a few more questions, and then we'll see if there's any audience questions as well. One of the big priorities, again, within our own client base is succession and organizational planning. Nearly half the firms are prioritizing what's called future-proofing their firm. How urgent is succession planning becoming across your membership? Firms taking a structured approach to long-term strategy, or is the focus still largely short-term, given a lot of uncertainty?
I think succession planning is different today, not only in our industry, but I just think in our culture. You look, it used to be whatever my dad did, that's what I did. And I was trained, I was brought up to take over. The construction industry is heavily family owned and operated. And it was a pride when the immigrants came over. They started with a shovel and they built some of the most wonderful companies that we have in our region. And as time has gone on, the next generation, we've been faced with the kids not wanting to stay in the business, and we've had the investment of private equity, where now you've got a firm coming to a decision. Is it going to be a transactional or is it going to be legacy? What is the most important thing for me? And if it's transactional, you're looking at those of income, the private equity that's going to say, I'm going to come in and they're going, although they may not be a construction company, you've got the investment being made. So that's going to change a lot of the decisions. So, and we've seen particularly the larger international companies, the mergers that have taken place. So the world that we saw even 20 years ago, the setup of the construction industry has changed and we'll move forward. We're in for major changes that are taking place. And, we'll have to wait and see where we go. But I think a lot of the owners today are looking at that and they see the reality that this is not my dad's industry anymore. And we're going in a different direction.
Similar in engineering, very similar in engineering. You know that because we worked on the ESOP issue in New York State for design. We want to see the next generation. But I think, Mark, is your scenario on is very similar in engineering.
Yeah, Johnny, we're seeing a lot of A&E firms in looking to sell. I have 4 in due diligence right now. So a lot of private equity, as we have mentioned here, and they're typically, it's hard to get those folks that are coming up in the firm to buy out the older owners just because of the cost and even the desire to be an owner, right? So things are different these years.
No, I think those are all great points. I mean, there's definitely opportunity for succession planning with private equity and ESOPs, and we're seeing that some of the smaller family-owned businesses that we're seeing that the next generation's really not looking to take over the company, or they're interested in going into a different market. So folks are slowly winding down. They're looking at what are the consequences of withdrawal liability for union contractors and what's the impact on those businesses. And I think, as we talked a little bit about AI, I think technology does create a tremendous opportunity and interest for people to come into the construction industry, because it's not just building something. It's how are you using technology to effectively build that? And I think that's really pretty critical and it helps attract a younger generation to the industry.
What an opportunity for somebody to come in for instant entrepreneurial ownership opportunities, solid way to live, and to redefine and shape the way we commute, work, live, play, and just enjoy New York City. I mean, tremendous opportunity for people.
Agreed.
So we're at the top of the hour, and it's, amazingly enough, not one question. So I guess I'll start to wind us down. Felice, we'll start with you, then we'll go to Johnny and Mark. One priority, one thing you would tell a member to focus on over the next 12 months across what you're seeing out there, what would it be?
What would I would tell a member to build relationships, take advantage of a lot of the educational opportunities out there, really look closely at your contract provisions and understand what those contract provisions are. I'm surprised the number of people that don't the prime contract or ask for the prime contract and understand what those flow down provisions are. So I think really, look very critically at the work and what you're doing and take advantage again of the opportunities to network relationships and enjoy those educational opportunities. People are looking to share and to partner.
Johnny.
Your people. I'd say that's the number one thing. The people in the pipeline. You mentioned it when it comes to the leaders might be exiting, and what's the next generation? The next generation coming in to replace them. Are they going to stay? Are they going to move around? The number one thing I'd say is your biggest resource when it comes to A&E is skilled people and keeping them.
And I'm just seeing one of the questions asking about WIC subs. And I think that's a huge issue, especially for the MEP trades. And it's something that we're looking closely at. Public owners seem to be slacking on their understanding of what's required in using those WICS trades in the bids and sticking with that and using that. So we've been really working closely with the Mayor's Office of Contract Services to support that and also on, alternative delivery projects, trying to get those MEP trades named up front so people have certainty in what they're doing.
I think the most important thing right now for people in this industry, for public works industry, is advocacy. Understand that the federal program is done with funding, and they're talking about the new funding program as well as the state capital program. They both have expired. And contractors need to know that they individually are very influential, and they need to connect during the next year with the public officials who make the decisions about what is ultimately their livelihood, the money that comes to the projects. This is the time to make the investment and use your influence, which you have tremendous amount of, and you may not be aware of it. So that's what I call for the next year, advocacy.
Great perspectives, really. Thank you for your time. And again, if you are not a member, if you're not working with ACEC, the STA, like I urge you, join, get involved. These are great associations which drive how we build and just advocacy, as Mark said. Download the survey, reach out to someone at Grassi for a copy of the survey. We'd be happy to come to your office, talk about the results and how they tie into the bigger strategic initiative of your respective firms. We appreciate the perspectives our panelists shared today, and we thank them. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful day. Tomorrow's somehow the last day of school, and to those that it impacts, get ready, enjoy your summer, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Great job.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.